Tonight on the Kudlow Report, why is Ayn Rand suddenly so popular today? Her books like The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged are selling like hotcakes. Why do so many CEOs swear by her? Is it her unregulated, laissez-faire free market message? But what about her other messages of selfishness, greed, and atheism? We will debate Ayn Rand. Plus, does President Obama really deserve credit for our financial and stock market comeback? Bob Shrum and Steve Morrill debated. And speaking of President Obama's first year, we'll have a report on the massive government command and control stimulus waste and how much more is to come, plus more command and control from the Payzar. He talked to CNBC exclusively after announcing new multi-million pay packages for some top execs. And believe it or not, today in 1913, nearly 100 years ago, President Woodrow Wilson signed the Federal Reserve Act, creating our central bank. So I ask you viewers, has the Fed harmed us or helped us over the past half century? Hint, they may have caused our three greatest crises. Fasten your seatbelts, everyone. The Kudlow Report begins right now. Good evening, everyone. I'm Larry Kudlow. Welcome back to the Kudlow Report, where we believe free market capitalism is still the best path to prosperity. Our lead story overlaps our message. There's a huge media buzz and resurgent book sales for free market philosopher Ayn Rand. Perhaps this revival is a function of the unprecedented government intervention during the financial meltdown. But Rand has her detractors who point to her promotion of greed, unfettered self-interest, and her rejection of faith in God. Well, here to set the table for us on this story is CNBC's Hampton Pearson. Thank you, Hampton. What are you thinking?
With Americans witnessing an ever larger government footprint, some say takeover of the economy, Ayn Rand, who believed laissez-faire capitalism was the only path to a moral society, is creating as big a buzz today as when Atlas Shrugged, her most famous novel, was published more than 50 years ago. The fictional tale centers on a group of wealthy industrialists who give up their jobs and disappear when a corrupt government gets too involved in the economy. Penguin USA has shipped more than 300,000 copies this year, a 250% increase from a year ago. Library of Congress Book of the Month Club readers rate Atlas Shrugged as the second most influential book in their lives, next to the Bible. Ayn Rand, the Russian-born novelist and philosopher, was an atheist who believed selfishness was a virtue. Her most well-known disciple, former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan. Today's struggle over economic policies, like the bailout of big banks, the auto industry takeover, and health care, have her controversial philosophy on a collision course with Obamonomics.
All right, thanks very much, Hampton. Here to debate the legacy of Ayn Rand and why she is so popular today, we have Don Luskin, Chief Investment Officer for Trend Macro, and CNBC contributor and syndicated columnist Jerry Bowyer. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Two very dear friends, a day before Christmas. I appreciate it. Let me begin with you, Don Luskin. I think you're writing a book about Ayn Rand. Why is she so popular today, and is it truly deserved?
Ayn Rand's books have been popular for decade after decade after decade. Yes, there's a resurgence in sales of Atlas Shrugged 52 years after its publication, but it regularly sells hundreds of thousands a year as a new generation discovers Rand's message of hope and freedom and personal choice. And in a time when personal choice is rapidly being diminished, everything from government takeover of healthcare to government takeover of banks, her message is more important than ever.
All right, so, Jerry, you heard our friend Don Luskin, but there is another side to Ayn Rand. I want to get to the CEOs in a minute who kind of, I don't know if they worship her, but they basically support her and talk about her. But the other side is she did promulgate the theory of greed and sort of unfettered self-interest. Right. And she was an atheist. She totally and utterly rejected faith in God or any spiritual program. She basically said we should just all act for what's best for us. Now, how do you handicap that and how do you integrate that or not with what Don Luskin is saying about her free market views?
Well, I handicap it in the sense that it handicaps our message, that the American people will not be persuaded by that case for capitalism. The American people were persuaded originally by Adam Smith's moral case for capitalism based on altruism and empathy, belief in God. The Declaration of Independence says, basically grounded our freedom in the belief in God, right? It said all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's a strong foundation for freedom. The Randians have never been able to really make the sale because Americans have an inherent sense that selfishness is not a good thing. So the Rand case that says, you know, selfishness really is good and embrace capitalism because it's selfish probably hurts us more than it helps us.
Don?
Well, gosh, Jerry, you ought to go back and reread Adam Smith a little bit more carefully. I'm sure you've heard his expression, the invisible hand. The invisible hand he's talking about is the invisible hand that moves selfish businessmen and producers and workers operating in their own self-interest to create goods that benefit everybody.
Whose hand? Don, whose hand? Who has an invisible hand? God has an invisible hand. That's Adam Smith's case. Adam Smith believed in theism.
That is not what he said, Jerry. Go back, Jerry. You are a religious person, and you're going to try to make this case, but that isn't what Adam Smith said. The invisible hand he's talking about was a metaphor. It was that entrepreneurs and laborers and capitalists produce goods for other people and for society as if an invisible hand were guiding them to do so. As if, quote unquote, go back and read it, that invisible hand in Adam Smith was not God's hand. Period, paragraph. You may be a religious man, you may believe in God, you may not, but let's not distort the record.
The prequel is the theory of moral sentiments.
But that was not the invisible hand he was talking about.
Gentlemen, I want to focus on Ayn Rand.
But there's a more important point that we have to make here, and that is we live in a secular society, and there are people in the society who are Jews, there are Muslims, there are Christians. Within the Christian faith, there are many sects, there are atheists, but there's one thing that we all agree on in America, and that is freedom. Freedom is inherently a selfish thing. Freedom means you own yourself. You own the product of your work. And that is what Ayn Rand meant by selfishness. She did not mean greed, she did not mean theft, she did not mean fraud, she did not mean stepping on anyone else. She means you own yourself. You are not a slave.
Freedom is not selfish. The soldier who dies for his country and our freedom, the soldiers who died in the American Revolution, were they selfish or not? Were they Randian heroes or not? They gave their life so that we can be free. So freedom is based not on selfishness,
they chose to do it because the cause in which they did it was one in which they believed.
The freedom...
If my child was threatened by a steamroller about to run her over, I would sacrifice myself to save her, but that would be my free choice. It wouldn't be Barack Obama or Jerry Bowyer commanding me to do it.
Hang on, Jerry. I want to pose this to you. Because, look, insofar as Rand's unregulated free market capitalism, I don't know about totally unregulated, but basically I agree with that. I regard myself as a free market capitalist. I totally regard myself that way. On the other hand, Jerry, where I wanted you to focus, and I'm going to get to the CEOs in a minute. Yeah. With the rejection of any faith or any spiritual nature, Rand is also known for greed, for self-interest, to a fault. A lot of people have criticized her for that. It's in her books. That's
in her life.
What comes out.
It was in her life,
too. It's in her own life. What about things like charity? What about things like helping others? Those don't really appear in Rand's books. She seems rather fanatical to make a point about economic freedom, a point with which I generally agree, but seems to rule out, for example, let me raise an example. George Gilder's book, Wealth and Poverty, talks about entrepreneurs who take huge risks
as gift givers.
That's right, as an act of giving to the rest of society.
And Ayn Rand attacked Gilder.
And
Ayn Rand hated Gilder.
Ayn Rand really slaughtered George Gilder for that notion that we might do it to help others. And I want to add, one of the CEOs that are associated with Ayn Rand is my friend John Mackey, the CEO of Whole Foods. And I went back and now I've had dinner with John and talked about this, but I went back and looked at some quotations, and he makes it very clear. While he agrees with Rand's free market stuff, he does not believe that selfishness itself is a virtue, nor does he believe that business exists solely to make a profit. Now, here's a guy who is a libertarian, self-proclaimed, but makes gradations. He separates himself, Jerry, from Ayn Rand. That's kind of what I'm asking you. Can one be half... Did she miss the boat